As soon as I reached the hospital room, my grandchild, Stephen, stopped me from behind. "Grandma." I turned around and saw my grandson, looking flustered and worried. "Grandma, we need to leave right now." "What do we do?" I couldn't understand what was happening, my mind filled with question marks. Although I was confused by Stephen's behavior, the seriousness in his face snapped me back to reality. Something was terribly wrong. Stephen may joke around sometimes, but he's never been the type to lie or mess with me like this. Away from the room where Kevin was receiving treatment, Stephen continued speaking. I accidentally saw something. As soon as I reached the hospital room, my grandchild, Stephen, stopped me from behind. "Grandma." I turned around and saw my grandson, looking flustered and worried. "Grandma, we need to leave right now." "What do we do?" I couldn't understand what was happening, my mind filled with question marks. Although I was confused by Stephen's behavior, the seriousness in his face snapped me back to reality. Something was terribly wrong. Stephen may joke around sometimes, but he's never been the type to lie or mess with me like this. Away from the room where Kevin was receiving treatment, Stephen continued speaking. I accidentally saw something. As he whispered, he opened his right hand to reveal a syringe. "What is that? Did you just take that without permission?" I was about to tell him to put it back, but Stephen lowered his voice even further and said, "If they use this on Grandpa, something terrible will happen." What are you talking about?" Stephen wasn't a pharmacist or a doctor. He's just a student. But as I listened to him, pushing him for more details, I felt a wave of disbelief crash over me. Could something like this really be happening? What in the world is going on? I'm not really sure either. But this, even though Stephen was clearly confused, he spoke with certainty. We had just stumbled upon a shocking truth, and neither of us could hide our surprise. "Anyway, let's just get out of here for now." He dashed toward the entrance, and I hurried to follow him, quickly getting into the car. My name is Emily, a housewife in my 60s. I became a full-time housewife soon after getting married, quietly supporting my husband, Kevin, while raising our children and taking care of the home. He has worked as a blue-collar worker at construction sites ever since we met. He's always been proud of his strength. "I'm all about this muscle. That's what I'm good for," he'd say with a laugh, flexing his thick arms. Our son Nicholas, on the other hand, now works as a pharmacist in the city. He has always been a hard-to-read person. He's got a solid build, but he's average-looking and not exactly the type to have a lot of women after him. So when Nicholas brought his girlfriend Sabrina home, both Kevin and I were genuinely shocked. After all, Sabrina was a fair-skinned, stunning, and gentle woman. Of course, both Kevin and I fully supported their marriage. "He may be a boring guy, but please take care of him," I told her. "Not at all," she replied shyly. "Nicholas, make sure you take good care of her," I added. Our son, tense and awkward, simply nodded in silence. But I couldn't help but wonder, where had Nicholas met such a beautiful woman? When I asked, Sabrina told me that she had fallen in love with him at first sight when she went to his pharmacy to fill a prescription. At first, it was just a pharmacist-patient relationship, but we found out that we were both from the same hometown. After chatting a few times, they realized they had a lot in common, and things quickly progressed from there. About 6 months after their visit to our house, they had a beautiful wedding and officially became husband and wife. Sabrina was absolutely stunning in her wedding dress, and standing beside her, Nicholas looked proud. Seeing the two of them on their special day brought tears of joy to both Kevin and me. Shortly after, Sabrina became pregnant, And about a year later, we received the wonderful news that she had given birth to a healthy baby boy. Both Sabrina and the baby were doing well, and Kevin and I were overjoyed at the birth of our first grandchild, a boy. "He'll probably be as smart as Nicholas," Kevin remarked with pride. "I can't wait to meet him," I added excitedly. We wondered what name they would give him, and what kind of smile he would have. At that point, we hadn't gotten many details from Nicholas or Sabrina yet. We didn't want to pry too much, figuring they might find it annoying, so Kevin and I decided to wait patiently. About a month later, Nicholas and his family came over to visit. They had named their son Stephen, and his sweet little smile instantly melted our hearts. Kevin and I were completely smitten by his adorable expressions and gestures. "Hello, Stephen. I'm Grandma," I said, smiling. "And I'm Grandpa," Kevin chimed in, just by making a funny face. Kevin had Stephen bursting into laughter. He wasn't usually the type to act silly, but he had become completely enchanted by Stephen. Watching the two of them together, I couldn't help but smile. As we doted on Stephen, Sabrina approached us, looking serious. "Emily, I have a favor to ask," she said hesitantly. "Oh, what is it?" "You can ask me anything," I replied. Please keep an eye on Stephen and Kevin for me," she said, her expression full of concern. Surprised by her seriousness, I quickly reassured her. "Don't worry. I'm watching over both of them, and I'll keep an eye on you, too." I figured she was just nervous as a first-time mother, probably worried about the challenges of raising a child. Sabrina was such a kind-hearted person that she always put others' needs ahead of her own. At the time, that's what I believed she meant. But by the time Stephen started attending kindergarten, I realized what she had really been trying to say. At the beginning of that year, she passed away suddenly after a severe cold took a turn for the worse. Sabrina was always frail. I couldn't even protect her, despite being her husband, Nicholas said, breaking down in tears beside her. As I watched his grief, I remembered Sabrina's last words to me. It struck me that perhaps she had known her time with us was short, that she would leave Nicholas and Stephen behind. The saying that beautiful women often meet untimely ends, or are touched by tragedy, kept ringing in my mind. "Grandma, what happened to Mommy? Is she just sleeping?" 5-year-old Stephen looked up at me, his eyes, so much like Sabrina's, glistening with tears. I couldn't find the right words, but Kevin stepped in and picked Stephen up. "Stephen, it's time to say goodbye to Mommy," he said gently. Under the cloudy sky, where snowflakes lightly danced in the cold air, I promised Sabrina that I would watch over both Stephen and Kevin, just as she had asked. For a while after, Nicholas tried his best to juggle work and raising Stephen, but it was clear that it wasn't easy. Eventually, he asked if he and Stephen could move in with us. "My workplace doesn't really support parents who have to balance child care. I was hoping you could help. Of course, I'll contribute to the household expenses," Nicholas explained. Considering Stephen's age, we figured it would be better for them to move in before he started elementary school. Kevin and I agreed, and thus began our new life together. I made it my mission to ensure that Stephen wouldn't feel the weight of his mother's absence. I showered him with all the love I could, determined to fill the void Sabrina had left behind. "I'm finding that this second round of child rearing is quite fun," I said to myself. In a way, it gave me a new sense of purpose, and I found joy in having a more active role in Stephen's life. With our family growing, Kevin seemed even more motivated at work. He looked revitalized, but I was a bit concerned that his job was taking over his life. He was working almost every day, coming home only to sleep. Nicholas, too, left his job in the city and found work closer to home. Though his income took a hit, He seemed determined to make things work for his sake. It wasn't long before Stephen grew curious about his father's work, especially the papers and books Nicholas often left scattered on his desk. When Stephen started elementary school, he would sneak into Nicholas' room and pore over the complicated books lying around. "Grandma, how do you read this?" he'd ask, pointing to a German medical textbook I couldn't make heads or tails of. Sometimes I'd make up an answer, unsure myself. He was growing up to be bright, cheerful, and curious, with a smile that reminded me so much of Sabrina. Stephen was also a bit taller than most of the kids his age, just like Nicholas had been when he was younger. It didn't take long for Stephen to develop a deep interest in science and medicine, likely because his mother had passed away from a seemingly simple illness. "Stephen, do you want to become a doctor in the future?" I asked him casually one day. He paused for a moment to think, and then responded, "I'm not sure yet, but I want to be someone who can think about people's health." It was a vague answer, but I could tell he had given it some thought. When I told him that was a wonderful dream, Stephen smiled. "I want to think about Grandpa, too." He's taking a lot of medicine, isn't he?" Stephen was right. Lately, Kevin had been going to the doctor more frequently and coming home with all sorts of medications and supplements. He's approaching 70 now, and there's no getting around it. Kevin, who used to pride himself on his strength and health, was finally showing signs of aging. "The doctors are taking good care of him. He'll be fine," I reassured Stephen, gently stroking his hair. One morning, Kevin was getting ready to head out to work. In recent years, summer heat advisories for heat stroke prevention had become common, especially for workers like Kevin who labor outdoors. Hydration and regular breaks were recommended for employees at construction sites. Carrying a large water bottle, some salt candies, and his lunch, Kevin stood at the entrance, dressed in his well-worn work clothes. The helmet tucked under his arm looked just as aged, a testament to the years he had spent on the job. "All right, I'm off," he said. "Take care, and stay safe," I replied, watching him as he opened the door. Suddenly, Stephen called out, rushing toward Kevin. "Grandpa, you forgot something." Stephen hurried over, holding his prescribed medication and a glass of water in his small hands. Kevin glanced at the pills in Stephen's hand and let out a sigh, as if he had just remembered. "These are the pills I'm supposed to take after meals, right?" They were for improving his blood circulation. At least, that's what the doctor had said. Kevin had been instructed to take them after every meal. I recalled that just the other day, he had skipped a dose. "Did you forget to take them again?" I asked. "I left them on the table, meaning to take them," Kevin muttered, grumbling about how forgetful he had become. He accepted the pills and the glass of water from Stephen, popping 3 or 4 tablets into his mouth at once and washing them down with a grimace. Of course, they didn't taste good, and he stuck out his tongue in distaste, scrunching up his face. "I never used to be like this," he said with a wry smile before finally heading out the door. His forgetfulness about his medication had become a regular part of our daily life, with both Stephen and me reminding him. That afternoon, Stephen was intently focused on the tablet in Nicholas's room. On his days off, it had become a routine for him to be there, absorbed in something. He had his notebook and pencil case spread out, jotting things down while using the tablet. The tablet was primarily Nicholas's, but Stephen also used it occasionally. After a while, he would put the tablet down and start flipping through a thick encyclopedia-like book. Curious about what he was researching, I hesitated to disturb him, as he was so engrossed. Watching him concentrate like that, I couldn't help but remember Nicholas studying in the same way when he was younger. It brought back a wave of nostalgia. I decided to bring Stephen a snack. Remembering we had pudding in the fridge, I quietly left his room. Nicholas was working so much that our conversations had become rare. He had started working at a pharmacy near a fairly large hospital in the countryside, where there were too few pharmacists, leading to long hours. He would leave early in the morning and return late at night. As a result, I was the one spending the most time with Stephen. When I went shopping, I almost always drove, as there weren't any supermarkets within walking distance. In the countryside, cars are essential. Though I had mostly used the car for grocery shopping, lately, I had been taking Stephen to the local community center and museum more often. They offered various educational workshops, and I tried to take him to anything that piqued his interest. Lectures on animal bone structures, the history of medicine for kids, and the secrets of the human body, to name a few. Stephen eagerly participated, and even the topics that I struggled to keep up with fascinated him. "Grandma, look, isn't this amazing?" he exclaimed as we walked through the museum, his eyes fixed on a life-sized model of a human body. He pointed at the lungs, the stomach, and then below that, naming them as if he were identifying stars in the sky. Could he have memorized all of this in one session? It was hard to believe. As I stood in amazement, Stephen, now staring at a model of blood vessels, said, "I've seen pictures like this in Dad's room." "Wait, so what you've been studying in there wasn't just schoolwork?" I asked, startled. It seemed that rather than his regular schoolwork, Stephen had been delving into more advanced medical studies. But he was still just a young boy in elementary school. He played with his classmates, studied like any other kid. Could he really be understanding the kind of material Nicholas used in his profession? When we returned home, my suspicions were confirmed. Stephen proudly showed me his notebook, which was filled with detailed drawings of the human body, illustrations of the heart, and explanations of how blood circulates. He had used colored pencils to neatly organize everything, and in a way, it resembled a medical textbook. "Did you draw all of this?" "Yes, it looks great, doesn't it?" He proudly puffed out his chest. I couldn't help but wonder what kind of person this child would grow up to be. His knowledge continued to grow day by day. Even Kevin could only nod along to Stephen's stories, barely keeping up. Occasionally, when Nicholas joined us for a meal, he too would be bombarded with Stephen's questions. "Hey, Dad, is insulin really good for diabetes? Is that true? Why? How come? Then what about this?" Specialized medical terms kept pouring out of Stephen's mouth, leaving Nicholas stunned. "Don't tell me he's been reading my medical books in my room." "That's exactly right. Stephen seems to absorb everything he reads. He's still in elementary school. There are plenty of other things more appropriate for him to read." But what Stephen showed Nicholas was his notebook, filled with intricate illustrations and detailed summaries. Nicholas couldn't help but be impressed. Stephen's relentless why and how questions continued, and Nicholas answered what he could. But soon, even Nicholas was at a loss for words, as the questions became more advanced than he could handle. Eventually, I was the only one who could still follow along with Stephen's conversations. Then, several years later, when Stephen turned 13, it happened. An infectious disease spread across the world, sparking numerous measures and policies to combat it. Despite rigorous sanitization efforts, the number of patients only kept rising. Effective treatments were slow to develop, and Nicholas came home every day looking more and more worn out from dealing with the constant stream of customers at the pharmacy. As if the pandemic weren't enough, the summer brought a punishing heat wave. Kevin's job site was no exception, and workers were still required to wear masks in the oppressive heat. In rural areas like ours, infrastructure wasn't as well developed, and many workers were collapsing from heat stroke. Every day is tough. No matter how hard we work, we can't make any progress. With the labor shortage, Kevin worked harder than ever. Please, don't overdo it, I urged. What are you talking about? I'm still as healthy as ever. He laughed, flexing his muscles as he headed out the door. But then he collapsed from heat stroke and was rushed to the hospital. When I received the call from emergency services, I panicked, but hearing that he was taken to the hospital we were familiar with, I felt a little relieved. Since Kevin had been going there regularly, his medical records would be on file, and they would take his current medications into account for his treatment. Without much time to prepare, I headed to the hospital with Stephen, who happened to be off from school that day. We got in the car, and I tried to keep my anxious thoughts at bay as I drove. I never imagined Kevin would collapse. He had been fine this morning, flexing his muscles and laughing. What if he suffers long-term effects? Or worse, what if something happens to him? Praying for his safety, I drove for 30 minutes. The rural road to the hospital was clear, so we arrived without hitting any traffic. When we got there, a doctor who seemed to be Kevin's attending physician was sitting at a desk with a displeased expression. The nameplate read Smith, and he gestured for us to sit down, with an irritated look on his face. Stephen and I sat down on the metal chairs, anxiously waiting for Dr. Smith to speak. "It's heat stroke," he said, still looking at the computer screen. "But we also need to consider other symptoms." He spoke in a low voice, carefully choosing his words. "Other symptoms? What exactly do you mean by that?" I asked. Considering Kevin's medications, it wasn't unreasonable to think there could be other concerns. But the doctor didn't give me a clear answer, instead vaguely replying, "For now, let's admit him for a while and monitor his condition." Why? The doctor's response was unexpected. Why wouldn't he just tell us clearly? His reluctance to explain left me feeling uneasy. But this was Kevin's regular doctor. With the pandemic still spreading, it seemed best to follow Dr. Smith's instructions. "Please take care of my husband," I said as I thanked him and left the office. Dr. Smith never took his eyes off the screen, and didn't so much as glance at Stephen or me. How can he function as a doctor like that? It was baffling. "Grandma, this is such a big hospital." "Amazing," Stephen whispered in awe. Worrying so much about Kevin, I had forgotten about Stephen's presence, and his innocent excitement made me feel a bit more at ease. Come to think of it, Stephen had been looking around the hospital with wide eyes since we arrived. I wondered if his interest in medicine had something to do with it. Even as we walked through the hospital, he was fascinated by the equipment and wanted to get closer. "Just a quick look. Just a little," he pleaded. "No, you can't. Come on, we need to go home and get some clothes for Grandpa's stay." I recalled how Stephen had been intently staring at the computer screen on Dr. Smith's desk earlier. Maybe it caught his attention because it was something unfamiliar. From what I could tell, it seemed to be a medical record, but I had no idea what any of it meant. I wondered if Stephen understood any of it, so I asked him in the car on the way home. He hesitated before answering. No, I didn't really get it." Stephen shrugged, and I naturally nodded in agreement. As soon as I got home, I packed 4 or 5 days' worth of clothes into Kevin's suitcase and headed back to the hospital that same day. Dr. Smith had mentioned that Kevin would only be in the hospital for a few days, so I figured that would be enough. During that time, Stephen and I would take turns visiting Kevin. Stephen seemed a little happy about this arrangement. He might have been excited to explore the hospital again, but I planned to warn him beforehand. Let me tell you in advance, don't wander around too much. I didn't even say anything yet. I know exactly what you're thinking, Stephen. How long do you think we've been together? Realizing I had read him perfectly, he stuck out his tongue and acted playfully. I informed Nicholas about the situation later that day. It might have been a bit hard on him, considering how exhausted he looked, but I had to tell him about Kevin. Yeah, I understand. I'll visit if I have some free time. Nicholas nodded weakly as he spoke. I couldn't help but worry about what would happen if Nicholas ended up collapsing, too. Illness can strike when you least expect it. The day after Kevin collapsed, I spent the morning frantically preparing to visit him at the hospital. Stephen had already finished getting ready and was standing by the front door. Grandma, I'll go ahead and head out. Are you sure? I think the bus should be running, but don't worry about it. See you later. As I watched Stephen's back, I couldn't help but think how much taller and more dependable he had become. He's really grown up, hasn't he? Without a moment to dwell on it, I rushed through laundry, cleaning, and washing the dishes. I hurried out of the house, and by the time I reached the hospital, it was just after 10 a.m. But there was no sign of Stephen, even though he should have arrived before me. Stephen, are you wandering around the hospital? That thought crossed my mind as I headed toward Kevin's room. Yet, when I got there, Stephen wasn't in the room either. However, something else struck me as odd. It wasn't Stephen I was concerned about, it was Kevin. He was still lying in bed, and it didn't seem like he was recovering much. Could it be that this wasn't just a case of heat exhaustion? Maybe there was another illness hiding beneath the surface, and Dr. Smith hadn't been clear about it for a reason. Various thoughts swirled in my head, and I felt a growing sense of dread filling my heart. I approached Kevin, who was lying down, and checked on him. From what I could see, he was resting within 4 drip, and although I wasn't a doctor, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Maybe I'm just worrying too much. Please get better soon, I whispered softly before leaving the room. Still, where had Stephen gone? I glanced around, searching for him, but he was nowhere to be seen. When I happened to check my smartphone, I noticed a message from Stephen saying that he had already gone home. Feeling relieved, I headed home as well. The next day, as I was busy with household chores, Stephen announced he was leaving early and hurried out the door. What could be driving Stephen to act like this? Be careful, I called out, unsure if he could hear me. But just before the door closed, I heard Stephen's voice. I'm off. Since returning home yesterday, Stephen had shut himself in his room, seemingly absorbed in some research. Knowing him, he was probably studying something related to medicine again. I left for the hospital a bit later, and as I arrived, I spotted Dr. Smith walking from the opposite direction. Dr. Smith, I called out, intending to greet him, but just like the other day, he passed by with an irritated expression. It was as if he didn't remember seeing me just 2 days ago, or perhaps he was in a hurry. I didn't feel great about it, but I brushed it off and continued toward Kevin's room. Even on my way there, I didn't run into Stephen, but just as I reached the room, Stephen called out to me from behind, "Grandma." I turned around and saw him, looking flustered. "Stephen, where on earth did you?" "Grandma, we have to leave right now." "What should we do?" As he spoke, he grabbed my arm and urgently pulled me out of the room. I had no idea what was happening, and my mind was filled with questions. Though confused by his behavior, I snapped back to reality when I saw the serious look on his face. Something bad was going on. Stephen might joke around sometimes, but he wasn't the type to lie or play tricks, especially not in front of Kevin's hospital room. When we finally reached a deserted area, Stephen cautiously looked around before speaking. I accidentally found this." As he whispered, he opened his right hand, revealing a syringe. "What is that? You shouldn't be taking things like that without permission," I scolded, about to tell him to put it back. But Stephen, still whispering, replied, "No, you don't get it. If they use this on Grandpa, something terrible will happen." "What? What do you mean?" Stephen wasn't a pharmacist or a doctor, just a student. However, given his deep knowledge, that even surprised Nicholas. It didn't seem entirely implausible. I urged Stephen to explain. During his break, Stephen had been researching medicine for his school project, the ingredients, effects, side effects, and which medications were best for certain illnesses. He also looked into dangerous combinations of drugs. I was even looking up the medicine Grandpa's been taking. There are apps now where you can easily check all kinds of medications, he said. Then when Kevin collapsed and was hospitalized, Stephen happened to stumble upon Kevin's medical record during a visit yesterday. The record listed all the medications prescribed, and Stephen found the combination concerning. He realized that the medication Kevin usually took, combined with the one Stephen now held, could worsen his condition. I was reading one of Dad's books, and it said so right there. Although I didn't understand the names of the medications, Stephen explained as best he could. "So you're saying they're about to use a drug combination that shouldn't be used together. But why? I don't know. Maybe there's a problem with how the medications are managed. It would naturally raise suspicions about the hospital staff, the doctors or nurses who managed Kevin's medications. This could point to Dr. Smith, the one overseeing Kevin's care. It was hard to believe that a doctor we had relied on for so long could do something like this." As I fell silent, Stephen spoke again. "I've been keeping quiet, but I've been worried about Grandpa's medication for a while." Apparently, Stephen had felt uneasy about the increase in medications, supplements, and how quickly they were being changed. While it was possible the medication adjustments were in response to Kevin's symptoms or condition, Stephen pointed out that he had never heard him say that the medications were helping. In fact, he seemed to be getting worse. Considering the ingredients and effects of the medications, Stephen suspected that something wasn't right, so he had been secretly gathering evidence. "Grandma, you always said everything would be fine because the doctors were taking care of him, but I just couldn't shake the feeling. You couldn't accept it, could you?" He nodded apologetically. "But where did you find the syringe?" I asked. "A nurse left it in Grandpa's room," Stephen replied. At the same time, he had overheard a strange conversation right before he entered the room. Stephen pulled out his smartphone, opened a recording app, and played back an audio file. In the recording, we could hear a nurse and Dr. Smith talking. The nurse was reporting Kevin's condition to the doctor. After a brief pause, Dr. Smith said, "I see. In that case, administer that medication to the patient. That medication." The nurse, seemingly confused, asked for clarification. "You know which one, the usual stuff," Dr. Smith replied in an authoritative, forceful tone. After a brief hesitation, the nurse coldly responded, "Understood." And the recording ended there. What did this mean? Stephen and I exchanged glances. "I'm not entirely sure, but it sounds like they're planning to use the medication improperly," Stephen said, his voice clear despite his confusion. "Improper use of medication." We were stunned by the magnitude of the revelation we had stumbled upon. This hospital saw many patients daily, all coming to heal from illnesses or injuries. It was unthinkable that doctors and nurses, those entrusted with their care, could be betraying them like this. "Anyway, let's get out of here for now." Stephen, still clutching the syringe in his right hand, bolted towards the hospital entrance. I quickly followed, and we both jumped into the car. We had to save Kevin and the other patients somehow. But how? I muttered as I started the car. I don't know. Maybe the police. It felt like we were fleeing from some unknown, terrifying force as we sped towards home. When we arrived, Nicholas was lounging on the living room sofa. His bag and discarded socks were scattered on the floor near his feet. "Welcome back, Nicholas. What are you doing home?" It was rare to see him at home at this hour. I actually got the afternoon off for the first time in a while. "I just got home," he explained, noticing the tension on our faces. "What's going on with you two?" "It's Kevin. Something terrible is happening," I exclaimed. Nicholas's expression darkened instantly. Assuming the worst, he quickly stood up from the sofa. "Did something happen to Dad?" "There might be illegal drug use involved," I said. What are you talking about?" At first, he couldn't believe it. After all, this was a large, reputable general hospital, one of the bigger ones in the area, with a decent number of doctors. The idea of illegal drug use seemed absurd. But then, Stephen explained everything. He replayed the recording on his smartphone and showed Nicholas the syringe he had been holding. Nicholas's face turned pale. "This is unbelievable," he gasped. "So the medication really is dangerous?" I asked. "Yes. What is that Dr. Smith thinking?" Nicholas quickly changed clothes, shoved his car keys into his pocket, and announced that he was going to the police. Stephen and I hurriedly followed, and the three of us headed to the police station. The possibility that illegal drug use was happening at a rural general hospital like this was shocking. Since it hadn't made the news yet, it was clear the issue hadn't become a major incident. How could something like this happen in a place that handles people's lives? When we arrived at the police station, we immediately flagged down an officer and explained the situation. At first, the officer was skeptical, but after hearing the recording from Stephen's smartphone, he quickly took action. We gave them our contact information and names, then headed home for the night. From there, things seemed to move surprisingly fast. The police quickly launched an investigation at the hospital, questioning the director, doctors, and nurses. To everyone's shock, several nurses confessed to the illegal use of drugs. They revealed that this malpractice had been going on for several years, and the names of the complicit doctors were exposed, including Dr. Smith. Stephen and I were astonished, and Nicholas was left speechless. This was unforgivable. Kevin had nearly been administered that suspicious drug, and the anger boiled within me. The investigation continued, and all the doctors and nurses involved were arrested. Further questioning revealed that the malpractice had been ongoing for a long time, ever since the current director took over the hospital. The case became a major story, not only in local papers, but also in national news. Following the media coverage, the hospital was forced to hold a public apology, during which the director and another senior figure bowed deeply in regret. The incident was discussed on evening news programs and daytime talk shows, with reporters swarming the hospital. Many of the hospital's patients protested, demanding explanations, and signatures were collected for the director's resignation. Chaos ensued. As Stephen and I sat down for lunch that day, we watched the news. I had made homemade meat sauce and tossed it with spaghetti, accompanied by a fresh vegetable salad. On TV, the news anchor and commentators were discussing the scandal. How did this happen? What were the hospital staff thinking? One anchor asked, flipping through her clipboard. The screen rapidly shifted between various scenes, discussions about the director's background, interviews with former staff, and images of the hospital under siege by reporters. I never thought it would turn into such a huge deal, I said. I still can't believe so many other doctors were involved, Stephen replied, shaking his head in disbelief. The news anchor reported that it wasn't just Dr. Smith involved in the illegal use of drugs. Several other doctors were also part of the scheme, working with pharmaceutical companies. They were receiving counterfeit drugs, which were cheaper than standard medications, and administering expired drugs to patients. Some doctors even admitted they knew the drugs had expired but used them anyway to avoid wasting them. All of this was done to maximize profits, even though the hospital's financial situation wasn't dire enough to justify such extreme measures. It was hard to comprehend why they would prioritize money over people's lives. Thinking about it like that, I couldn't help but feel the depth of the darkness behind it all. According to some reports, many nurses and doctors had left the hospital over the years. It was likely because they couldn't stand the corrupt practices happening around them. It raised a question of why no one stepped in to stop it sooner. Further investigation revealed that some nurses had tried to blow the whistle on the illegal activity. However, they feared losing their jobs due to pressure from the doctors, and the threat of unemployment silenced them. In a rural area like ours, finding new work wasn't easy, so they were trapped between doing the right thing and keeping their livelihood. It must have been an unbearable burden, balancing patient care, ethics, and their careers. Reflecting on the nurses' dilemma, I couldn't help but feel a little sympathy for them. As the investigation continued, it was discovered that even experimental drugs were being used on patients. This was especially shocking. Administering drugs that hadn't been fully tested was reckless. Who knew what kind of side effects or dangers they posed? It was clear that these people had little regard for the sanctity of human life. I couldn't understand how something like this could have been allowed to happen for so long. The news report paused for a commercial break, and the screen shifted to a cheerful beer ad, creating a surreal contrast to the grim story that had just been told. "This is scary." Stephen stared at his empty plate of spaghetti and muttered. He seemed deeply shocked by what had happened in the field he had been so passionate about and studied so diligently. He had uncovered a serious scandal in the very area where he wanted to help people. Despite this, Stephen would likely never receive recognition for his role in exposing the wrongdoing. Yet, there was no doubt it had left a mark on him. After clearing the dishes, we visited Kevin's hospital room. Thanks to the police's swift action, the dangerous drug that was about to be administered to him had been stopped just in time. One of the officers told us how it had been a close call. With Dr. Smith arrested, another doctor took over Kevin's treatment, ensuring proper care was given. His health rapidly improved. "Why does everyone look so worried?" "I only passed out from heat stroke," Kevin said, flexing his arm to show his strength. Relief washed over our family. Thinking back to that day, if Stephen hadn't taken that syringe, it would have been used. The thought of what might have happened chilled me to the bone. When I explained everything to Kevin, he was shocked. "This is all thanks to Stephen," I said, gently patting his head, which had grown taller than mine. "Really? Is that so?" "Yay, Dad, Stephen's amazing," Nicholas added. We all showered Stephen with praise, though he modestly denied it. "No, it wasn't just me. If Grandma hadn't believed me and listened seriously, none of this would have happened." At his words, Kevin and Nicholas nodded in understanding. I felt a little embarrassed and, like Stephen, tried to deflect the praise. I had been a housewife with no particularly strong hobbies or talents. Stephen and Nicholas, with their dedication to their work, always seemed to shine in my eyes. All I had wanted was to support them in whatever small ways I could, and seeing the outcome of this situation gave me confidence that my efforts had not been in vain. But really, it was all thanks to Stephen. A few days later, Kevin was discharged from the hospital and returned to work. He joked that he'd be careful not to collapse again. Well, even if I do, I've got Stephen and Nicholas, so no worries. That's not what I meant. I gently scolded him as I handed him his lunch. Meanwhile, Nicholas had been unusually quiet and seemed down for a few days. When I asked him what was wrong, he slowly opened up. "I've been reflecting on everything," he said. He realized that he had been so absorbed in his work that he almost missed spending time with his father, just like when Sabrina passed away. "I was so focused on work back then, too, that I wasn't there for her enough," he admitted. Even though many years had passed, the memories of that time were still vivid for him. Nicholas decided to reconsider his work-life balance and even looked into changing jobs. He wanted to find a place where he could have more flexible hours and spend more time with his family. No longer would he leave early in the morning and return late at night. This shift brought joy to both Stephen and me. He continued to immerse himself in his studies of medicine and drugs. What had once been a vague dream of helping people had evolved into a more concrete goal, becoming a pharmacist, like his father. As a result, Stephen often brought thick medical books to Nicholas, asking him endless questions. "Dad, about this medicine in the book." "Huh? Oh, well, that one is." Nicholas, not to be outdone, kept up with Stephen, studying new medicines and expanding his knowledge as well. As I brought snacks to them, I felt that our daily life had become more connected than ever before. I could only hope that these peaceful and close-knit days would continue without fading.
Rosemary, while you were away, I moved my parents' stuff into our house. What? What do you mean by that? While I was on a trip, my husband York had moved his parents' moving boxes into our house without asking. And on top of that, I received unbelievable treatment from York. "You should not come back anymore. York doesn't want me to come back home anymore." Even though this house is where our family has always lived, York wants to kick me out and live with his parents. However, I had anticipated being kicked out by York and easily retorted, "Okay, I'll move out on my own." I sought advice from my dad, Wallace, and took a certain action. First, I sent an email to someone and made a plan. I returned to America with Wallace, and then I came back to our house. I started to execute the plan as intended. York, who had been naively thinking he could live with his parents, was surprised by the unexpected turn of events. Actually, the plan I had made with Wallace was: "My name is Rosemary. I am a 45-year-old dietitian working in a hospital. Originally, I was supposed to follow in Wallace's footsteps, but inheriting my mom's love for cooking, I became a dietitian. However, my beloved mom passed away before I graduated from college. After that, Wallace started working in France, so we sold the house I was born and raised in, and I started living alone in an apartment. Being plain-looking since childhood, I've always been inconspicuous wherever I go. Moreover, attending girls' schools from middle school to university, I had no encounters with men, and I had never had a boyfriend. However, I was fortunate to meet good people wherever I went, and after graduating from college, I got married. At that friend's wedding, I met my current husband, York, who was 3 years older than me and a friend of the groom. He seemed like the type who would be popular with the ladies. Luckily, or perhaps coincidentally, he had just broken up with his girlfriend. His ex-girlfriend was a nurse, and it seems they broke up due to misaligned schedules and night shifts. When I mentioned that I was a dietitian with early mornings and few holidays, He was very pleased. However, at that time, I was busy studying for the national exam for registered dietitians, so I was busy on weekends. Even so, he was kind enough to send me messages saying, "I miss not being able to see you, but good luck with your studies." Saying, feeling a sense of destiny with him, I thought I'd like to marry him if I passed. And on the day of the exam results, he invited me out to celebrate my passing that night. Congratulations on passing. This is how I feel. Would you accept it? What he handed me was an engagement ring. He proposed to me right then and there. Overjoyed as if my passing was his own, I tearfully said yes right away. And so, our married life began. At first, we thought about living in an apartment, but with Wallace's help, we bought our own home. I was looking forward to a happy life from now on, but after getting married, I started to feel a sense of discomfort around York. Thinking it was because I had no experience with men, I assumed it would be okay once I got used to it. However, one day, when York was looking at my pay stub, he made a comment that made me do a double take. "What's this?" I thought dietitians, being professionals, would earn more. I'm disappointed. What? Well, I just started working, and we're both working, so an income of around $200K should be fine, right? I retorted, feeling somewhat offended. It's not like I got married to be supported by my husband, but being told my salary was low didn't feel good. Yet, York went on to insult my earnings further. I've been totally deceived. If I knew the income was this low, I would have asked before getting married. A nurse would have earned more. York must have been talking about his ex-girlfriend. It's one thing to complain about my earnings, but comparing me to his ex-girlfriend is unforgivable. Indeed, nurses receive night shift allowances and holiday pay. In comparison, my salary is lower because I have fewer early mornings and holiday shifts. However, I have my own side of the story to tell. I happened to see York's pay stub the other day, and it turns out he earns even less than I do. Yet, I thought we wouldn't struggle with our combined incomes, so I didn't say anything. I tried to gently break it to York, not wanting to hurt his pride. "Well, it seems like you have it tough too, so I guess you were hoping for a bit more from my salary. Sorry for not meeting your expectations." That's right. I work for a small company, and my salary is really low. So I wanted to marry a professional woman to achieve financial stability. I only meant to cheer him up with what I didn't even believe myself, but I never thought York would take it seriously. Before we got married, he was happy that my work hours were regular. But after we got married, he complained about my low income as if he had changed his stance. What kind of world does a man live in where he expects his wife's income to be higher than his? I was just dumbfounded by York's unreliable behavior. As soon as he knew about my income, York started looking down on me. Yet, he wouldn't hesitate to buy whatever he wanted without restraint. Even when I asked him to be a bit more frugal, he wouldn't listen at all. I've been spoiled by my parents since I was a kid, buying me whatever I wanted, so I can't change my attitude towards money that easily. I couldn't say anything back to such a spoiled statement from York. It's no excuse to say that he was spoiled by his parents when he was a child at his age. The following year, after we got married, we were blessed with a boy. I hoped that becoming a parent would change York, but his habit of spending recklessly didn't improve, even during childcare. It was always the same with him spending his entire salary. If it wasn't enough, he'd sneak money from my wallet without me noticing. While I was struggling to manage work and budgeting while raising our son, Todd, York hardly contributed to childcare. As time passed, Struggling through these tough days, Todd is now preparing for his college entrance exams this year. Thanks to my careful budgeting, it looks like we can afford to send him to college. Todd, understanding our financial situation, has been studying hard to enter a national university. Yet, York came up with a ridiculous idea. Because I bought a new car last year, the loan repayments are tough. Plus, there's Todd's exams, right? So, I've decided to sell my parents' house and have them move in with us. Wait, what are you saying? Suddenly living together like that, it's going to be a problem. Why? Rosemary, you get along with my parents, right? If we lives together, we'll get their pension and become wealthier. Indeed, I don't hate the idea of living with my in-laws. It's just that I didn't like York's way of making decisions on his own. In terms of finances, we've been managing well so far, so there shouldn't be a problem as long as we don't indulge in luxuries. Why do you always decide everything selfishly? Even the new car, you bought it without consulting me. That's my car, so I don't need to consult you every time. Seeing York's selfish behavior, this time Todd got furious. Dad, enough is enough. When I go to college, I might come home late from part-time jobs or clubs. If grandparents Douglas and Octavia are living with us, it's going to be awkward, right? Why don't you discuss these things properly with Mom? Todd, coming out of his room all of a sudden and raising his voice, left York wide-eyed in surprise. But the next moment, York turned to me, lashing out as if he was taking it out on me. Todd talking back to me, his dad, like that is because of your poor parenting. Reflect on it. Saying that, York locked himself in his room and didn't come out for a while. I was happy that Todd stood up for me. However, I was worried that the current home environment would affect his exam preparations. Despite my worries, Todd successfully passed his first choice national university. But tired of living with York, Todd decided to move out and start living on his own. He said he wants to try his best on his own without relying on his parents, even if it means working part-time. Even so, York continues to ignore both me and Todd. Ever since it's been just York and me at home, we don't even talk though we're in the same house. It feels suffocating. During these days, feeling mentally drained, I called my dad Wallace in France to seek advice. Wallace, worried about me, suggested I come to France for a while. I thought I couldn't take a long break because of my job, but it seems my colleagues were worried about my pale complexion recently. After explaining the situation, I was allowed to take some time off. However, I wanted to keep my consultation with Wallace a secret from York. So I told him I was invited on a trip by a friend. I hoped that if I was away for a while, York might cool down a bit. But heading to Wallace's, an entirely unexpected situation unfolded, starting with a call from York while I was in France. Rosemary, I've moved my parents' stuff into our house while you were away. What? What do you mean? What do you mean, what? I've been saying, haven't I? That I'd live with my parents. More than that, Dad and Mom are angry with you. They said a wife who spoils their son like you is the worst. No way. I couldn't believe what York was saying. My in-laws shouldn't be the type to speak ill of me like that. So, I've decided we'll live with my parents and me from now on. If you were here, it'd inconvenience my parents. After all, you're the strict wife who makes their sons speak ill of them. York must have badmouthed me to my in-laws. Maybe the part about them being angry with me was also a fabrication. Angry, I thought about shouting something back. But to stay calm, I just said, "I'll call you back later," and hung up. Luckily, Wallace was home, so I immediately shared the phone call's content with him. Wallace, looking disgruntled, shook his head. York, really? Relying on his parents at his age? That's what I'm saying. I don't understand why I have to be the one kicked out. After a long discussion, Wallace came up with a suggestion that excited me. I thought this would teach York a lesson. First, I contacted someone by email, then called York's mobile phone. York, talking over the phone won't cut it. So let's discuss this when I get back from my trip. I said this calmly, but York, with a laugh in his voice, replied, You shouldn't come back, just as Wallace advised. York didn't want me to return home. Expecting this, I retorted easily. Okay, got it. I'll just move out on my own. Huh? York sounded taken aback by my unexpected response. But thinking I was just bluffing, he laughed and replied, Move out? Where to when you have nowhere to go? Oh, to the place I'm currently at. What are you talking about? You're on a trip with friends. Wait, you're not with a man, are you? Now he seemed to misunderstand that I was with a lover, so I decided to reveal the truth. Well, if it's a man, it's indeed a man. But it's Dad. Ah, Wallace's place. York sounded relieved. But he'd be surprised by the next part of the conversation. Dad's living in a mansion in France now, so I've decided to live here too. That's why we're going to sell the house we've been living in. What? What do you mean? Well, you should know, right? That house is in Dad's name, built for us. If I'm not living there, it's to be sold. What? But Dad and Mom are here right now. What are you going to do? That's what I said. It's no use talking over the phone. York, finally grasping the situation, hung up without saying anything else. He can't possibly imagine the further tragedy waiting for him. Upon my return to America, a week later, I returned home with Wallace, where York was living with my in-laws. At the entrance, my in-laws greeted us with smiles. Wallace, it's been a long time. Yes, I can't often return to America due to work. Rosemary has always been under your care. While Wallace and my father-in-law, Douglas, were exchanging greetings, York quietly emerged. It seemed he hadn't yet informed them about the house sale. Looking awkward, York just bowed his head. York, the movers are coming today to pick up the stuff. Have you prepared everything? All your stuff is already packed. Oh, it's not just my things that are being moved out. Huh? Do I have to move my things out today, too? York's surprised shout caught Douglas's attention. What's going on, York? Why are your things being moved out? York, looking guilty, hesitantly explained the situation. Douglas became furious and started yelling at York. You said this house was bought under your name with a loan so we could live together, making your parents ashamed, unforgivable. Douglas's thunderous voice left York speechless. Then the moving truck arrived. After my things were moved out, my mother-in-law, Octavia, came out to direct the movers. Thank you for your hard work. Our stuff is prepared here. Please take it. Octavia had neatly prepared all the household items, including York's. Seeing this, York was dumbfounded. Mom, what's happening? Why are you packing Dad's stuff too? Where are you planning to take it? Watching York panic and question Octavia, we all burst into laughter. You've been completely fooled. What? What's going on? Why is everyone laughing all of a sudden? Indeed, this was all a plan to trick York, discussed in advance by everyone here. The first person I contacted by email from France was Octavia. Octavia had been worried about my tired appearance for some time. After repeatedly asking why, I ended up telling Octavia everything about York. Octavia was shocked, especially at the part where York blamed his extravagant habits on his parents spoiling him. Octavia tearfully apologized for her parenting in front of me, which made me feel guilty. But York's wasteful spending wasn't Octavia's fault. As I comforted Octavia, our bond deepened. For me, without a mom, Octavia became someone I could consult about anything. Wallace was aware of my close relationship with Octavia. Thus, he suggested involving the in-laws in our plan. Octavia, without letting York know, had been looking for a new place for them to live with Douglas. Douglas's scolding of York was all an act. I nearly burst out laughing at their convincing performance. Octavia, thank you for arranging the movers for me as well. Now I can move to the house Dad built in France. I'm sorry, Rosemary. My son has caused you so much trouble. Octavia, we agreed not to say that, didn't we? Octavia and I laughed together. York, unaware of how close I was with his parents, looked surprised. Mom, where are we moving to? We've already sold our family home. We've already arranged a new place for us. York seemed relieved at Octavia's words. But that relief would soon be short-lived. So, it was like that. I worried for nothing. Then I'll just go there too, right? What are you talking about? That's a senior living apartment for Douglas to live in with someone else. York, you're not a child anymore. Find your own place to live. As soon as Octavia said this, York's face turned pale. That's impossible. I don't even have the money for moving, let alone find a new place. Indeed, York had squandered his salary on hobbies and entertainment, leaving him with no savings. No matter how he struggled now, it was his own responsibility. Desperate, York looked at me with pleading eyes. I could guess what he was about to say. By the way, Wallace built quite a big house in France, right? I had no idea you were such a well-off lady. Listen, I'll do anything you say from now on, so could you take me with you to that house? Suddenly speaking in a sweet tone, he was indeed trying to rely on me. I had no intention of indulging such naive thoughts, and firmly stated my position. I've been fooled by your kind words on occasion, but I can't forgive you any more. You've barely contributed to our living expenses and have just been playing around. I don't want to be your wife anymore. I've already discussed this with Todd on the phone yesterday, and we've decided to get a divorce. Todd agrees it's for the best. I vented the feelings I had been holding back, feeling a sense of relief. My in-laws seemed to agree, nodding deeply. What am I supposed to do now? York cried, tears in his eyes. But my decision was firm. I presented him with the divorce papers and demanded his signature. Yet, York stubbornly refused to sign. Seeing this, Douglas showed his anger again. York, enough is enough. After all the trouble you've caused Rosemary, now you're thinking of relying on her parents' home. I'm ashamed to call you my son. That's right. I admit, I've spoiled you too much. But York, you're an adult now. Stop being so selfish and start living on your own. Convinced by his parents' earnest persuasion, York shed tears. What? Even Dad and Mom. Do I have no allies here? Muttering so, York signed the divorce papers. He then arranged to store his belongings in a storage unit and left the house alone. Betrayed by the parents he thought were on his side, he was visibly shocked. However, the in-laws had decided to cut ties with York. Not just them. I also promised never to let York see Todd again. This was a strong request from Todd. He had always resented York for never acting like a father. With the divorce as an opportunity, Todd wanted to sever ties with York. I thought it was for the best for Todd. Rejected by his parents and disowned by his son, York must have lost the will to live. Having lost everything, York spent some time living in monthly rental hotels and internet cafes. But once he received his salary, he managed to move into an apartment where he could live alone. During the divorce, I gave York a small amount of money as part of our shared assets. It was practically nothing, but I wanted to avoid any future claims for money, given my financial situation. In essence, it was severance pay. However, once York had a bit of financial leeway, he started getting into partying. Why do I know this? Because York contacted me, saying, "I'll find a woman with a good income and make you regret leaving me." Initially, after becoming alone, York would contact me just to express his loneliness. But once he had money, his attitude became arrogant again. After some time, the communications from York suddenly stopped. I wondered if he had found a new girlfriend, but it turned out the situation was far more serious. According to the former in-laws, York had fallen for a nurse he met at a party. Despite not being reciprocated, York persistently pursued her. At worst, he even showed up at her apartment. As a result of his relentless stalking, he was reported and arrested in the act. The former in-laws, having intended to sever parental ties, were troubled by their son's scandal, feeling deeply sorry for them. Being a parent is tough, no matter how much you try to distance yourself. You're still responsible when something happens. Despite causing so much trouble for his parents, York seemed unrepentant. During the interrogation, it was true love. He kept insisting. This led to a judgment that he was not remorseful, and his release was delayed. Such a man is better off cooling his head in prison for a while. After all, a penniless man in his 50s chasing such ideals will only cause annoyance. Now, I live elegantly in a mansion in France with Wallace. Still not accustomed to the environment and not fluent in French, I'm not working yet. However, I can't stay unemployed forever, so I'm attending French lessons. Once I'm proficient in the language, I plan to help out with Wallace's company. As time passed, Todd graduated from university. He then moved here to work at Wallace's company. In fact, Wallace had called him over with the intention of making Todd his successor. It was lonely being apart from Todd for 4 years, but now we can live together forever. This thought fills me with joy. Now that I become quite fluent in French, I assist with Wallace's company and work as a cooking class instructor locally. Though my marriage failed, my life in France is very fulfilling. Despite being in my mid-40s, this is an ideal environment to enjoy life. I've decided to forget my past self, who worried about being plain and unpopular, and live positively. After all, there's still so much more to come. Surely, Mom in heaven is watching over me.
I've been despised by my son Keith and his wife Christina for 17 long years. With my husband Gerald already passed away, I had no one to turn to and simply endured it all. At first, I tried to reprimand Keith and Christina for their lack of effort in finding work, but they would get violent with me every time, so I eventually stopped trying. In the midst of all this, my grandson Todd was the only bright spot in my life. Raising him became my sole reason for living. Now, even he is graduating high school and leaving home. So, I made the decision to move out without telling Keith and Christina. I feel lonely, but I've resolutely moved into my new place. I've resolved to spend the rest of my life on my own. Then, I got a call from Todd. "Congrats on your graduation." "Congrats to you too, Grandma." For me, who struggled for so long, those words filled me with more joy than anything. It felt like I was finally being rewarded. But that wasn't all. Todd had a plan in mind as well, and thanks to that, I was about to be saved. I'm Teresa. 12 years after losing Gerald, I'm still working as an employee at a small company at 59 years old. To be honest, continuing to work with an aging body is quite tough, but I have my reasons for needing to keep at it. Living at home are my son Keith, his wife Christina, and my grandson Todd. They may be full-grown adults now, but perhaps due to poor upbringing, Keith's behavior isn't very good. Ever since he entered middle school, he went through an intense rebellious phase. He somehow enrolled into high school, but was constantly getting into trouble with teachers and classmates. Moreover, when he was 17, he got involved with Christina, who was always hanging out at the arcade he frequented, despite her being 2 years younger. And if you can believe it, he ended up getting her pregnant. By the time I realized, it was already too late and there was nothing I could do. The day I found out about the pregnancy, when Keith and Christina revealed it to me, I was so shocked I nearly fainted. I knew it was a possibility for high school students to get pregnant, like you see in dramas or personal accounts, but I never imagined Keith would do something like that. Gerald, who was still alive back then, was furious at Keith's selfish actions and they got into a huge fight. Gerald was a strict man, so he must have found Keith's misconduct all the more unforgivable. On top of that, I'm sure he felt his own parenting was to blame. From around that time, he started overworking himself and drinking heavily, which I believe ultimately led to his shortened lifespan. I went to apologize to Christina's parents, but it seemed they were also at their wits' end with her, and declared they wanted nothing more to do with her and cut ties completely. With nowhere else to go, Christina naturally ended up living at my house. Even after Todd was born, they made no effort to move out. Instead, they would hit me up for money and stay out playing around until late at night. That's the kind of life they lead. At first, I hoped the two of them would gain some awareness as adults. Regardless of the circumstances, I believed that now that we were family, we needed to support each other. More than anything, I couldn't let go of my wish for them to become upstanding adults. However, no matter how much I tried to advise them, not only would they ignore me, they would spew verbal abuse at me, and when it got really bad, they'd casually get physical with me. As this cycle repeated over and over, I became more afraid of their violence than of persuading them. Honestly, I felt I had failed as a mother. But with no one else to turn to, my mind was completely occupied with just trying to get through each day without incident. As a result, the two of them never tried to hold down jobs, and even if they worked part-time, it never lasted long at all. With such indolent personalities, there was no way they could raise Todd properly. It was essentially child neglect. So I stepped in as a parent figure to raise Todd. Children really are adorable. Just picturing Todd's face gave me the strength to persevere even when I was busy. I may have also felt I was atoning for my sins. It's because I couldn't raise Keith properly that I wished for Todd to live a happy life. Todd must have understood how I felt. He grew into an astonishingly easygoing and obedient child. During long vacations, I would take Todd on trips to North Carolina. Why North Carolina? Ever since I was a child, I loved the Great Smoky Mountains. No matter how much the times change, seeing the Great Smoky Mountains standing there majestically, unchanged, made me feel like I was receiving some of their power as well. Having lost Gerald, I felt uneasy about whether I would be able to live a long life. If I were to pass away before Todd grew up, who would take care of him? I wanted to stay alive at least until he reached adulthood. So by receiving energy from the Great Smoky Mountains, I hope to stay healthy and live as long as possible. After bringing Todd there a few times, it seemed he grew fond of the Great Smoky Mountains too. Whenever he had time, he would pester me, saying he wanted to go to that spot where you could see the Great Smoky Mountains. Perhaps thanks to the power of the Great Smoky Mountains, I was able to take care of Todd without falling seriously ill. Keith and Christina were as disinterested in child rearing as ever, so I was the one dropping Todd off and picking him up from preschool, attending school events and parent-teacher conferences. Keith and Christina were so uninvolved that Todd's teachers mistook me for his mom. Raising Todd while holding down a job was definitely grueling, but unlike Keith, Todd never rebelled and remained closely attached to me. However, Keith's treatment of me grew worse year by year. "Hey, give me some money. I'm going out." "No, this is for living expenses." When I refused him like that, Keith said, "Shut up. Don't you talk back to me." He punched and kicked me in a violent outburst. "Hey, hurry up and make dinner. Why are you resting? Make dinner first, then you can rest." They would say that without lifting a finger to help with chores, even when I had just gotten home from work. Moreover, when I said to Christina, "You know, I can teach you how to cook. Why don't you try making it yourself?" She made a disgusted face. "No way. Why should I have to do that? You do it." And retorted. In other words, to them, I'm not a parent or anything of the sort. I'm just a convenient housekeeper who earns money and handles all the household chores. When I realized that's how they saw me, I became terribly sad. It was so far removed from the family life I had envisioned. Keith's heartless attitude was extremely painful. Then one day, while I was playing with Todd has it good. Actually getting raised properly, he suddenly said loudly enough for me to hear. Taken aback by his words, "What are you saying? I took plenty good care of you," I argued. Then, Keith slammed the table forcefully and started shouting. "So why do I have to live this miserable life then?" I stayed silent, not understanding what Keith meant, but his anger didn't subside. "It's all your fault. If you had raised me right, I never would have gotten Christina pregnant." Christina, who was listening nearby, made an exasperated expression. "What? That makes no sense. You're the one who seduced me, remember? What are you going on about now?" Keith apparently didn't like what Christina said. He suddenly slapped her across the face. Christina crumpled to the floor holding her face and burst into tears. "Hey, Keith. There's no need to hit her. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. It's all your fault. My job isn't going well because of you." No matter how much I scolded him, he just kept screaming and wouldn't listen to a word I said. This kind of outburst from Keith was a common occurrence, and each time, everything was made out to be my fault. But even when Keith yelled at me, rather than getting irritated, I would end up feeling sad instead. It's true that I was busy with work and may have made him feel lonely. Looking back, I had that realization. However, no matter how much you blame others, it won't make your own life any better. When he was young, Keith probably had excess energy and was able to vent his life frustrations outside the home. But as he got older, his friends dwindled and his stamina declined, so all of Keith's pent-up discontent became directed at me. And then, on one cold winter day, I ended up coming home late at night after working overtime. Blowing on my freezing hands to warm them, I opened the front door. I went straight to the living room where Keith was sitting on the sofa glaring at me. "I'm home. Sorry I'm a bit late." But Keith didn't reply. he walked up to me, snatched my bag and hurled it to the floor. "What are you doing? Hurry up and make dinner." "What?" I said, "I'm hungry, so make some damn food." Exhausted from work, I was irritated by Keith's attitude. "Dinner this, dinner that. Stop demanding it like a child. Make it yourself." But if he was the type to reflect from those words, I wouldn't be having such a hard time. Enraged by what I said, Keith grabbed my arm and started dragging me towards the front door. "Stop, that hurts." Without a word, Keith opened the front door and threw me outside. "Hey!" Ignoring my scream, he slammed the door shut and locked it. I had my house key in my bag, so I couldn't get back inside. "Please, open up," I said while pounding on the door. Suddenly, the door swung open. My relief was short-lived. Keith hurled a bucket of water at me. "It's freezing. What are you doing?" The water was so cold I thought for a moment my heart might stop. "How's that? Nice and cold, huh? That's what you get." Then Todd came running in a panic from inside. "Dad, what are you doing?" he demanded of Keith. "Shut your mouth. This doesn't concern you." Todd didn't back down even after hearing Keith yell. Watching this, I recalled the same thing happening long ago. That time, Todd got yelled at by Keith, had water thrown on him, and ended up locked outside by Keith. I had come home from work to find Todd shivering and huddled outside the front door. That's when I helped him. I didn't want him to suffer through something so awful ever again. "It's okay, Todd. This has nothing to do with you." Hearing that, Todd clenched his fists in frustration. Keith looked down on me with a malicious grin. "That's right. It's your fault, so you better apologize right here. If you don't, I won't open this door until morning." My body was shaking not just from the cold, but from an overwhelming sense of humiliation. However, nothing would change even if I tried to stay strong. Keith would likely make good on his threat and leave me out here all night. For Todd's sake too, I had no choice but to endure it and apologize. "I'm very sorry," I managed to say through my chattering teeth. The cold was rapidly sapping the heat from my drenched body. Keith smiled with satisfaction. "That's better. Now hurry up and make dinner," he said, laughing as he returned to the living room. Todd immediately rushed over to me. "Grandma, stay with me. We need to warm you up quick." He supported my body as he said that. This kind of thing was hardly rare. Even if I tried to resist, it was clear I would only get beaten down with my aged body. Still, the reason I continued living with them was the lingering guilt over not raising them right. But each time they got violent with me, I couldn't help feeling pathetic. I would get dizzy wondering how long this life would go on. Moreover, whenever I heard on the news about elderly parents being killed by their sons, I felt a sense of dread, as if seeing my own fate laid out before me. So I decided for myself that when Todd left home, that would be when I graduated from this life. And that moment arrived sooner than I expected. One day, during his senior year of high school, Todd came to me for advice. "Grandma, when I graduate, I'm going to get a job instead of going to college." I was surprised by Todd's sudden declaration. "Is that so? But are you sure? If you want to go to college, we'll find a way to make it work." Even when I said that, Todd shook his head sadly. "I'm glad you're saying that. But Grandma, you're at the age to retire now, right? And with how Dad and Mom are. But don't worry. I'm not sacrificing myself." Todd's words made my heart ache with overwhelming sadness. If only I had been more on top of things. If only Keith had held a steady job like everyone else. Then Todd wouldn't have had to feel this way. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I apologized to Todd through my pitiful tears. Fortunately, Todd's job search went smoothly and he secured a position at a company in Kentucky. Since he decided to move into the company dormitory, Todd would be leaving home right after the graduation ceremony. Keith and Christina didn't seem to show much interest in the matter. From the moment I heard about Todd's plans, I had been secretly devising my own and putting them into action. The day before Todd's graduation, as I was preparing. Hey, about tomorrow's graduation ceremony, we're going, Keith declared. What? Why? Why? Because he's our son, of course. You got a problem with that? There wasn't really a problem. However, I felt something was off about Keith suddenly wanting to attend when he had never properly participated in child rearing or school events before. That said, it would be odd to refuse his attendance for that reason. All right then. Let's all attend together. When I suggested that, Christina scoffed. What are you talking about? You don't need to come, she said coldly. Why not? Why can't I go? I retorted, not understanding what they meant. You see, graduation ceremonies are pretty high profile. That's why I want to dress nicely. That's fine, but why can't I go? I told you, you'll just get in the way. How am I in the way? Look, there will be photos taken, right? Then you'll be in them too. Get it? Having an old hag like you in the shot will ruin a perfectly good photo. I was irritated by Christina's cruel way of speaking. If they wanted to celebrate Todd's graduation as a family, I had intended to quietly step aside. But Christina was saying she wanted to exclude me just to satisfy her own desire for recognition. Not once had I ever received a word of gratitude from Keith or Christina. It's not like I particularly wanted such words, but I at least wanted them to let me attend Todd's graduation. Please, I really want to be at the graduation. Yeah, right. I never even graduated high school. And that's all your fault. Exactly. The nerve of you. Know your place at your age. I gave up trying to persuade them at that point. If I kept arguing, their erratic violence would come next. So I had no choice but to swallow my feelings and back down. Grandma, Todd said, his face contorting with sadness. It's okay. Keith is right, after all. Old folks should stay home. And then graduation day arrived. As soon as the ceremony ended, Todd would head to his company in Kentucky and move into the dorm. And since I was moving forward with my own plans, if things went poorly, this might be the last time I ever saw his face. Grandma, I'm heading out now. Do your best. Then Keith, Christina, and Todd left the house. After seeing the three of them off, I immediately made a phone call. Thank you for everything. Actually, there's been a change of plans. No, Keith and Christina aren't home right now, so I wanted to move my things out while I have the chance. Is that so? Thank you very much. I hung up and immediately started preparing to move. A short while later, I handed off the bare minimum luggage to the movers who arrived, then I too left the house. That's right. Like Todd, I had been preparing to graduate from this life. I had already informed my company and prepared a new place to live. I wanted to tell Todd too, but I was afraid the information might leak to Keith somehow, so I couldn't bring myself to say it. If they found out I was leaving home, Keith and Christina would never allow it. Because they would be losing both their money and housekeeper at the same time. My original plan was to move out when Todd finished his graduation and Keith and Christina were away from the house, but this unexpected turn of events seemed like the perfect chance. I felt bad about Todd, but I believed he could manage on his own, and figured things would work out if I sent him a letter. So I decided to resolve my own situation. And my plan went well. I successfully moved into my new home without Keith or Christina noticing. It's located very close to a spot with a great view of the Great Smoky Mountains. Since I would be living alone anyway, I at least wanted to spend my remaining days with the Great Smoky Mountains in sight. But that wasn't the entirety of my plan. As I was catching my breath in my new home, I got a call from Keith. "What? Is the graduation ceremony over already?" "Don't screw with me," I could hear Keith shouting over the phone. "We just got home and some real estate agent showed up telling us to get out of the house." "What the hell is going on?" "It's just as he said. I put the house up for sale. Luckily, a buyer was found right away, so you two need to move out soon." "Why the hell would you sell your own house? Have you lost your mind?" "For my graduation. I've already moved out, so you two will have to figure out the rest on your own." That's right. I hadn't just moved, I had also put my house on the market. Even if I left the house, I was afraid that as long as they lived there, Keith and Christina would continue their indolent lifestyle. Despite the terrible treatment I endured, somewhere in my heart, I hadn't given up on Keith becoming independent. However, I realized that would be impossible with things as they were, so I decided I might as well put them in a critical situation. That way, Keith would have no choice but to work for the sake of his own livelihood, and Christina would have to support him. I wondered if my plan would work out. It was impossible to know at this stage. Still, it had to be better than continuing to live in the same place forever. However, Keith didn't seem to grasp my intentions. He was still grumbling resentfully over the phone. "So now, after all this time, you're suddenly abandoning me? And you call yourself a mom?" "I've graduated from being a mom." "Stop spouting nonsense. What about money? You sold the house, right? Where did that money go?" "If you mean that money, I took it all. For my retirement fund." Keith finally seemed to understand the situation he was in and started crying pathetically. "Mom, I was wrong. I'm so sorry for the terrible things I've done. So please, don't abandon me. There's no way I can get a job at this point." Hearing Keith's feeble words over the phone made my heart waver for a moment. But I endured it. "I'm not blaming you for what you did. I think I made you feel lonely too. That's exactly why I want you to become independent from your parents. I'm getting old now. Then at least tell me where you moved. Isn't it cruel to never see each other again? I won't demand money, so please tell me." "No. I can't trust your word. Live happily with Christina. That's all I can say to you." Mom, this is the last time I'll speak with you. Make Christina happy. Goodbye." Leaving those words, I hung up the phone. I blocked Keith's number, turned off my phone and placed it on the desk, then sprawled out on the floor. Outside, it was already getting dark. The colors of the sunset filtering through the curtains faintly dyed the white ceiling a pale pink. Gazing up at that ceiling all alone, I let out a deep sigh. A sense of relief that everything went well, guilt over abandoning Keith and Christina, loneliness from being all by myself, all these feelings swirled together inside me. And memories of the past naturally flowed into my head. I had the illusion that they were being projected on the white ceiling like a screen. When I first met Gerald, the day Keith was born, the day Christina came to our house, the day Gerald passed away, and the memories with Todd. I lifted myself off the floor and headed to the next room. There, a photo of Gerald was placed. I sat in front of it. "It's just the two of us from now on," Anne murmured. Months passed. I was still working as a full-time employee. At the company's urging, I ended up extending my employment, so it seemed I could keep working for a while longer. To be honest, I had wanted to quit my job and take it easy, but considering my life in old age, I wanted to earn as much money as possible and maintain connections with people. That said, when I wasn't working, I lived quietly by myself. Today, to prepare for vacation, I headed to the supermarket near my house to shop for groceries. It was a place where Todd and I used to often gaze at the Great Smoky Mountains. Now, thanks to its prime location, it had become a supermarket and small park. After finishing my shopping, I was looking out at the Great Smoky Mountains when I suddenly got a call from an unknown number. I hesitated for a moment about answering, but decided to pick up. "Hello? Hello? Grandma? It's me. Todd." "What, Todd? What is it?" I let out a shout so loud it surprised even myself. Actually, Todd didn't have a mobile phone back then, so he shouldn't have known my number. "I bought a mobile phone right after starting my job. I was determined to call you, Grandma, so I had written down your number." "Is that so? I'm sorry for leaving like that without telling you." "No, it's okay. I knew. I happened to overhear you on the phone with a real estate agent. So I thought it was a long shot, but I found the documents you were hiding and made a note of it." "Really? I had no idea. But I'm so glad. It had been on my mind." I was truly relieved to hear Todd's voice after so long. "If you're calling now, does that mean you're on vacation from work?" "Yeah. So I came to visit." "What?" I was about to ask Todd what he meant when I suddenly felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. Startled, I turned around. There stood Todd with a huge smile on his face. "Grandma, long time no see. You surprised me. How did you know I was here?" Todd replied to my question with a proud look. "I went to the address I had written down, but you weren't there. But I just knew you'd come here. You used to bring me here a lot, remember, Grandma? The surroundings have totally changed, though." "That's true, we sure did. But in that case, you should have told me in advance. It would have been terrible if you came all this way and couldn't find me." "Actually, I didn't get a job in Kentucky. I only said that to trick Dad and Mom. I'm really working in North Carolina." "Is that so? So we were living close by all along." Todd still looked overjoyed. "That's right. You struggled because of me, Grandma. So from now on, I want to repay you even a little." "Struggled? Not at all. I was happy to raise you, Todd." I was overwhelmed by Todd's kindness. My life up until now had certainly been tough, but I felt in this moment that my desperate patience for Todd's sake was being rewarded. "I'm hoping to spend time with you whenever I have a vacation, Grandma. So let's look out at the Great Smoky Mountains together again." "Yes, let's do that." The Great Smoky Mountains seemed to quietly look on as Todd and I conversed. From then on, whenever Todd had vacation time, he would stay at my place and we would have a wonderful time together. Up until now, we couldn't spend such quality time due to Keith and Christina's harassment, so it was truly enjoyable. I had resigned myself to a lonely old age, but now it felt like a bright future had suddenly opened up before me. Before, I would just hole up in the house waiting for time to pass, but these days I actively socialize with the neighbors as well. Perhaps thanks to those efforts, I made new friends too, making each day even more fun. I was able to hear about what became of Keith and Christina through an old acquaintance. They are poor but seem to be getting by on their own somehow, so that's a relief for now. Today, I plan to go with Todd to our spot where we can see the Great Smoky Mountains. It was a constant struggle, but I'm living happily now, grateful to have finally obtained these peaceful days. Phew, it's finally over. That took forever. Let's get out of here. David, Eric, now that your dad is gone too, I don't have to take care of you two anymore, right? Right after the funeral for my son Charlie, his wife Olivia blurted out those unbelievable words. What could have possibly possessed her to say something like that? How could she say such a terrible thing to the twins, David and Eric, who are drowning in grief over losing their father? You're the only parent these children have left now. Think about it. Huh? I'm remarrying a handsome doctor. The old hag can raise those twin brats. See ya. While I stood there in shock, Olivia selfishly spat out those lines and breezily walked away. The other attendees and I were stunned by this sudden turn of events. It's fine. After Olivia left, I muttered under my breath. I'll take responsibility for them. The chaotic funeral finally over, I returned home and collapsed into bed with a deep sigh. I was utterly exhausted, the day feeling longer than ever before. My eyelids grew heavy on their own. At 2 a.m., I was awoken by strange laughter coming from the next room. When I opened the door, there were two faces illuminated by the pale blue glow of a computer screen in the darkness. There were David and Eric, who should have been consumed by sorrow, laughing as they looked at the computer. I'm Zoe. Ever since I lost my beloved husband 3 years ago, I've been living alone in this house. The one joy in my life is when my adorable grandkids come to visit. Today, my grandsons David and Eric are coming over to play for the first time in a while. So I've been restless with anticipation since morning. Even though lunch preparations are done, I wander around the house feeling like something is missing. Ah, that's right. The camera. The other day, the twins, who just started elementary school, said they would show me their new school uniforms. I started looking for the camera so I could properly capture them in all their glory. Found it. Now I'm all set. Just as I finally felt at ease, I heard a car engine stop in front of the house. Grandma. Hello. Hello. Energetic voices rang out from the entryway. Coming. Welcome, you two. I called back as I hurried to the front door, where David and Eric stood wearing their new backpacks and uniforms. Behind them, my son Charlie and his wife Olivia walked up. Mom, I'm home. Hi, Zoe. Long time no see. I'm so glad you all could make it. Come on in. I welcomed my son's family into the house and we had a photo shoot with the kids in their school uniforms. The sight of my grandchildren wearing backpacks slightly too big for their small frames was absolutely adorable. It was hard to tell if they were wearing the backpacks or if the backpacks were wearing them. Grandma, guess what? Eric and I are in different classes, David shared excitedly. Yeah, I have a male teacher and David has a female teacher. Eric chimed in. That's right, my grandchildren are twins. When my only son Charlie married Olivia 8 years ago, they surprised us all by having twins not long after. I remember being overjoyed at the thought of gaining 2 grandchildren at once. However, I have to admit I was quite shocked when Charlie announced he was marrying Olivia. Charlie had always been a gentle, serious boy who kept to himself throughout his school years. So I never imagined he'd choose such a strikingly beautiful and confident woman as his bride. Thanks to their stunning parents, David and Eric have grown into quite the handsome young lads themselves. They might just be what you'd call beautiful boys. Olivia, eager to capitalize on their good looks, was determined to get the boys into the entertainment industry, signing them up for dance classes and dragging them to auditions. When they first started kindergarten, David and Eric were too young to understand and simply went along with whatever Olivia had planned for them. As I prepared lunch in the kitchen with Charlie, my mind wandered, curious about what the boys had been up to lately. While Olivia stepped out to the car to grab something she forgot, Charlie leaned in and whispered, "Mom, there's something I need to tell you." It seemed to be about David and Eric. Right after they started elementary school, they started rebelling, saying they didn't want to dance anymore and hated the idea of being on TV. For a while there, things were pretty rocky between them and Olivia. Apparently, as they developed stronger senses of self in elementary school, they made their feelings clear to Charlie and Olivia. It seems they take after Charlie, both shy and uncomfortable with being in the spotlight. Olivia tried her best to keep them going, but in the end, we decided to let them quit for their own well-being. It almost caused some serious tension between us, to be honest. Things are okay now, though. Charlie confided in me quietly, not wanting Olivia or the kids to overhear. I had been worrying about how they were doing lately but hadn't found the right moment to ask. I'm glad Charlie opened up to me. It sounds like the boys are focusing on adjusting to their new school life now. We all gathered around the dining table as David and Eric regaled us with tales of their school adventures. I had been concerned, knowing how reserved they can be, but I was relieved to see they seemed to be enjoying school. After a lively meal and conversation, my heart swelled with happiness as I watched them head home with bright smiles on their faces. A few months later, my son's family of 4 came to visit again. So David, Eric, what new things have you boys been up to lately? I inquired. I learned how to make my drawings move on the computer, David proclaimed proudly. And I'm in the middle of learning the C programming language, Eric added. I'm sorry, I asked you to explain it to me, but it went right over my head. But it sounds like you're learning some incredible things. These days, both boys are far more passionate about computers than sports. I know next to nothing about computers myself. But from what Charlie has told me, there's no doubt that David and Eric's computer skills are leagues ahead of other kids their age. Charlie and I both believe the twins have a real talent for computers and have high hopes for their future in the field. Charlie has even been looking into programming classes in the area for them. I don't get why they're so into those boring computers. They'd be way more likely to get famous and make money if they got on TV instead, Olivia grumbled, clearly not thrilled with their budding interest in technology. Perhaps she still hasn't given up on her dreams of turning them into child stars. What's the harm in letting the kids do what they love? Charlie said, trying to calm Olivia down. I nodded in agreement, thinking to myself, there's nothing that would make me happier than seeing my grandchildren thriving and doing what they enjoy. As time passed, David and Eric entered the 6th grade. They were still as passionate about computers as ever. And apparently they had even completed and graduated from a programming class a few years prior. Lately, it seems Charlie has been away on business trips frequently, often leaving the house empty. As a result, when Olivia's work schedule leaves the kids alone, David and Eric often come over to my house to hang out. Dad's never home these days, so we can't go out and do anything fun, Eric complained. Yeah, he promised we'd go camping next holiday, but who knows if he'll actually follow through, David added with a sigh. Your dad must be really busy with work. I'm sure he's doing his best and holding back his desire to spend time with you boys, so we should cheer him on, I encouraged them. David and Eric seemed a bit dissatisfied with the lack of quality time with Charlie due to his hectic work schedule. A while back, Charlie had excitedly shared with me that he'd been put in charge of a major project that could make or break the company. That project must have finally kicked into high gear, and he's been working hard alongside his team. Come to think of it, I've started watching them overnight quite often recently, not just during the day. At first, I was more than happy to help out, thinking it would give Olivia a much-needed breather since she's practically raising the kids on her own while juggling work. However, it seems that every time Charlie goes on a business trip, she ends up staying out overnight. While I absolutely adore spending time with my grandchildren, it feels like it's been happening a lot more frequently. Since they're in 6th grade now, I figured they wouldn't need too much hands-on care, but perhaps Olivia is finding it overwhelming. Zoe, sorry to bother you again. I'll be leaving them in your care today. Olivia called out breezily as she dashed off. David and Eric would be staying over again tonight.
Oh no, I forgot my cold medicine. David suddenly remembered.
Oh dear, you've caught a cold? That's not good. Olivia just left, so why don't I give her a call and ask her to bring it over? I offered. I dialed Olivia's number. It rang several times, but no one picked up. Eventually, it went to voicemail. Olivia wasn't answering her phone. Mom, she didn't pick up. What should we do about the medicine? I hope David's cold doesn't get worse, I fretted.
Oh yeah, Grandma, whenever Mom has something important going on, she turns her smartphone off, David chimed in.
His words caught me off guard.
What? So you're saying whenever she's busy with something important, there's no way to reach her at all? Yep, even when we call, it never goes through. But don't worry, Grandma, my cold isn't that bad. I'll be okay, David reassured me.
Compared to my growing concern, the two boys seemed completely unfazed. Even if Olivia has something important going on, what would she do if there was an emergency with the kids? So far, nothing serious has happened and the children are safe, but this is starting to feel like child neglect. I felt sorry for both David and Eric, knowing their mom wasn't giving them the attention they needed, and spent the day with an unsettled feeling in my gut. The next evening, when Olivia came to pick them up, I decided to ask her about it. Olivia, Eric forgot his medicine, so I tried calling you shortly after you left. Was it difficult for you to answer the phone?
Oh, right, sorry about that. I had my phone turned off. Didn't the kids tell you?
She replied nonchalantly, as if it were perfectly normal. Ah, I see. But don't you think it might be better to keep your phone on in case something happens and we need to reach you? I was taken aback by Olivia's attitude and couldn't bring myself to say anything more. After that, David and Eric stayed over a few more times. While I was watching them, I tried calling Olivia's smartphone several times for various reasons, but as expected, she never picked up. Then one afternoon, I received a call on my smartphone from an unknown number. It wasn't a number I recognized. I hesitantly answered the call and heard a man's frantic voice on the other end.
Hello, is this Charlie's mom? I'm Charlie's coworker. I'm sorry for the sudden call. Please try to stay calm and listen. Charlie is in the hospital right now.
It took me a moment to process the words I was hearing. A wave of anxiety washed over me. I got the hospital's location from Charlie's coworker and quickly called a taxi. On the way there, I couldn't settle my nerves, worried sick about Charlie's condition. What could have happened for Charlie to end up in the hospital? Was he going to be okay? That's right, I wonder if Olivia knows anything. I decided to try giving her a call first. Despite my desperate wish for her to pick up, The phone just kept ringing and ringing. Once again, she didn't answer. What on earth was she doing that she couldn't be reached even at a time like this? I called over and over, praying she would pick up, but the result was always the same. The entire way to the hospital, I kept trying to get in touch with her, but she never answered her phone. When I arrived at the hospital, Charlie's coworker greeted me with tears in his eyes and filled me in on the situation. Apparently, he had suddenly collapsed at work and was rushed to the hospital by ambulance. They gave him the necessary treatment, but his condition was poor and he still hadn't regained consciousness.
I tried calling his wife, but no matter how many times I called, she just wouldn't pick up. That's why I contacted you, his mom, instead. Thank you so much for coming right away.
So Olivia didn't answer her phone after all. Apparently, he had been suffering from insomnia lately and his complexion had been poor, causing concern at work just before this happened. Was he so busy with work that he couldn't even sleep? Did he push himself too hard? I couldn't help but regret his diligent nature. I knew I needed to let Olivia know what was going on, so I decided to head to Charlie's house. Worried sick about Charlie's condition, I left the hospital with a heavy heart. When I arrived at Charlie's house, David and Eric were there alone, having just returned from school.
Grandma, what's going on?
Oh, you're home. Is your mom not back yet?
Not yet. Should we wait here for her?
I agonized over what to tell David and Eric about him. Was it really my place to say something? I decided to wait until Olivia got home so we could explain the situation to the three of them together. After a while, she returned.
Olivia, did you check your smartphone? I called you so many times.
Olivia rummaged through her purse and pulled out her smartphone.
Zoe, what's with the sudden visit? Oh, you're right. I do have a bunch of missed calls. Did something happen?
Despite feeling irritated by Olivia's attitude, I took a deep breath and spoke.
Olivia, David, Eric, listen calmly. Charlie collapsed at work today and is in the hospital now. The doctors did everything they could for him, but it seems he still hasn't regained consciousness.
Shocked by the sudden news, David and Eric froze, their faces etched with disbelief. Olivia, on the other hand, simply let out a surprised what, but her expression remained unchanged as she fiddled with her smartphone. I had expected her to be more shocked and worried, so her reaction caught me off guard. My confusion was completely lost on her, who was absorbed in her smartphone. And so, the days passed by one. Our wish for Charlie to wake up went unanswered as he remained unconscious. The doctor informed us that there was no prospect of him regaining consciousness, and we had to brace ourselves for the inevitable. A few days later, Charlie's funeral was held. David and Eric kept their heads down, not saying a word as tears streamed down their faces. They may be mature for their age, but they're still only in 6th grade. Having lost their beloved dad, they must be in the depths of despair. All I could do was stay by their side and rub their backs in comfort. Olivia, not seeming to care about her grieving children, sat there looking bored and greeting the attendees with a curt, indifferent demeanor. Charlie's co-workers, subordinates, and even his bosses turned out in droves for the funeral. Every single one of them mourned his passing, their faces etched with deep regret and tears flowing freely. Seeing firsthand just how important my son had been to his company, my heart swelled with emotion. But something doesn't add up. I overheard some of Charlie's co-workers talking as they left the funeral yesterday, and the content of their conversation is bothering me.
The project had finally gotten off the ground and things were settling down, so why did he have to pass away so suddenly? He hadn't been working overtime lately, but his face looked so haggard.
He mentioned he couldn't sleep. I wonder what was weighing on his mind. This conversation left a lasting impression on me and has been swirling around in my head ever since. I had thought that Charlie's busy workload had taken its toll on him, leading to this. But his coworkers didn't mention anything like that at all. In fact, it seems like work had settled down, and they were worried about how he had been doing lately. If he was struggling with something to the point of insomnia, could there have been a reason other than work? With those questions lingering in my mind, we reached the end of the funeral.
Phew, it's finally over. That took forever. Let's get out of here. David, Eric, now that your dad is gone too, I don't have to take care of you brats anymore, right?
Olivia said with a sneer as soon as the funeral ended. I don't think those are the kind of words a mother should be saying to her children with that expression. What could have possessed her to say such a thing? I can't fathom how she could say that to David and Eric, who are in the midst of deep grief over losing their dad. Thinking there must be some mistake, I asked for clarification.
Olivia, what do you mean by that all of a sudden? If these kids are around, they'll just get in my way. I don't need them. How can you say that? You're the only parent these children have left now. Think about it.
I tried my best to calm Olivia down, thinking she must be out of her mind with grief.
There's nothing to think about. This couldn't be more perfect. Now I can live with my boyfriend. Boyfriend? What boyfriend, Olivia? I'm remarrying a handsome doctor. The old hag can raise those twin brats. See ya.
While I stood there in shock, Olivia selfishly spat out those lines and breezily walked away. The other attendees and I were stunned by this sudden turn of events. It's fine. After Olivia left, I muttered under my breath. I'll take responsibility for David and Eric. Rather than growing up with the pain of being abandoned by their mom, I'm sure I can provide them with a much better environment living with me. More than anything, I'm happy to have the chance to live with my adorable grandchildren. As I steeled my resolve in my heart, David spoke up.
Grandma, can we live with you?
Of course you can, that goes without saying. David smiled, looking relieved.
I'd rather live with Grandma than Mom. Mom's never home anyway. I don't think she cares about us, Eric said.
His words pierced my heart. What kind of mother makes her children say such things? Was Olivia really that indifferent to them? We stopped by Charlie's house to quickly pack some of David and Eric's things before finally making it back to my place. After finishing dinner, David and Eric seemed exhausted, barely speaking and looking sleepy. They must be physically and emotionally drained after today. Not only did they have to say goodbye to their dad, but their mom up and left them too. I can't help but worry about their mental state. They both seem so calm, as if they've already accepted this sudden turn of events, but who knows what thoughts are swirling in their minds. Rather than saying anything, I suppose all I can do for now is keep an eye on them. You two must be so tired after everything today. Get some good rest, okay? Once I finish tidying up, I should get to bed early too. By the time I was done with the housework, David and Eric were no longer in the living room. It seems they had taken their showers and gone back to their room. I finally crawled into bed and let out a deep sigh. Suddenly, the events of the day flashed through my mind like a whirlwind. Does Olivia really intend to give up her children for good? Even though it was late, I tried calling her one more time, wanting to confirm how she really felt. I had a sliver of hope that she might answer, but the call went straight to voicemail. I was so utterly exhausted, the day feeling longer than ever before. My eyelids grew heavy on their own. At 2 a.m., I was awoken by the strange sound of laughter coming from the next room. Thinking I must be hearing things, I listened closer, but the laughter indeed continued. They were supposed to be sleeping in the room next door. Those boys should be fast asleep, right? I thought to myself as I quietly crept over to peek into their room just to be sure. When I opened the door, there were two faces illuminated by the pale blue glow of a computer screen in the darkness. David and Eric, who I thought were sleeping, were actually laughing as they looked at the computer.
What are you two doing up in the middle of the night like this? Oh, Grandma. Did we wake you? Sorry about that.
Hey, Grandma, come take a look at this. I did as they asked and peered at the computer screen.
Olivia? Darling? Whose WhatsApp is this? Don't tell me. Yup. This is Mom's WhatsApp with her boyfriend.
On the computer screen, I saw a log of Olivia's WhatsApp conversation with a man who appeared to be her boyfriend.
Grandma, you probably have a notification on your smartphone by now too.
At their prompting, I went to grab my smartphone and checked. Sure enough, there was a notification. I opened it to find the same WhatsApp log that was displayed on the computer screen had been sent to me.
How did you do this? Was it you too?
David and Eric answered with bright, clear faces.
Yeah. We did it. By now, the image should have been sent to everyone registered in Mom's smartphone. What? What do you mean?
Confused, I asked the two of them to explain the situation.
I think it's Mom's fault that Dad collapsed, David said.
Apparently, Charlie had grown suspicious of Olivia's increasingly frequent overnight absences lately. David overheard Charlie confronting Olivia, demanding to know where she was and what she was doing. But she completely ignored him and brushed him off. Maybe it's because we're still kids. I'm sure Dad was struggling with something, but he never told us anything. It seems Charlie was agonizing over how to deal with Olivia's frequent absences and her constantly leaving the children with me.
Sometimes when I was sleeping next to Dad, I'd wake up because I could hear him making pained noises. Maybe he was feeling so crushed, he couldn't even sleep, Eric shared.
Call it a child's intuition, but they had noticed their dad was under a lot of stress and not getting enough sleep.
But you know, our uncles and aunts were saying it was because he was so busy with work. It's totally Mom's fault though,
David said, looking frustrated.
I couldn't say it was Mom's fault at the funeral because no one would believe a kid, but... So after the funeral, I decided to show everyone the evidence by programming Mom's smartphone.
They figured even if they tried to tell the adults that their dad had collapsed, no one would believe them. And Olivia would certainly stop them if they tried to speak the truth. I was surprised they would expose her like this, no matter how good they were with computers. The two of them spoke with such bright, clear faces, I couldn't help but be impressed. Still, I wondered how they had managed to manipulate Olivia's smartphone when she was rarely home, so I asked.
Mom's really bad at using smartphones and PC devices. That's why we always set things up for her. We memorized all her passwords and stuff then. We happened to see her WhatsApp too, and that's how we figured out who she was always with. When Mom's with that guy she calls darling, she really does turn her smartphone off. So we made it so the information would send when she turned it off. So if the images are being sent now, that means her phone is off. Look, all the evidence we prepared is being sent.
I checked the notifications on my own smartphone.
The brats are going to the old hag's house, so I'll be with Darling today and tomorrow. Darling is so handsome and talented, but my husband, he works so hard all the time but barely makes any money. There's no comparison. Maybe I should frame my husband for cheating so I can divorce him and get a big payout in the settlement.
There were so many unbelievable messages. As I opened the notifications, I even saw some about David and Eric.
I thought they'd be able to make money since I gave birth to such handsome boys. But neither of them wants to enter the entertainment industry, and they don't have the guts to stick with it. Unbelievable. I paid so much money for their dance lessons and auditions, such a waste. Those kids are nothing but a disappointment.
What a mother she is. She forced her own selfish desires on her children and then calls them a disappointment. I really feel for these poor kids. I had always sensed that Olivia was a woman who spoke her mind, but I never imagined she would badmouth others with such a foul mouth. I thought she was just being rude at the funeral because emotions were running high, but is this her true nature? I wonder if Charlie knew this was the kind of person she was, or if he had been deceived. Discovering Olivia's true colors was a huge shock to me. In stark contrast to my shock, David and Eric seemed to have rather refreshed expressions on their faces.
I bet our relatives and Mom's friends are all freaking out right about now.
A few days later, I received a call from Olivia's mom.
I can't even begin to apologize for my daughter's actions. I don't know how to make amends.
She kept apologizing profusely, sounding incredibly remorseful. Since what's done is done and can't be undone, I accepted her apology and asked how Olivia was doing. According to her mom, ever since the exposé, her relatives and friends had cut ties with her. As a result, she had no idea where Olivia was or what she was doing now. I guess that's to be expected. I thought to myself, unsurprised. To be honest, there were days when I worried if I had made the right choice by suddenly taking in David and Eric. But I was relieved that we had cut ties with Olivia early on, before she could derail these children's lives any further. I truly believe they'll be able to live much happier lives without Olivia's influence. And apparently, even the man she was cheating with, who she was so keen on remarrying, saw her true colors and dumped her. But that wasn't all. This time, with the evidence of her infidelity spreading even to her friends, one of them decided to track down and investigate the man she was cheating with. As it turns out, he had a bad reputation with women and was dating a bunch of them. She was just one of many. Moreover, his claim of being a doctor was a lie. He was actually just a regular employee at a small company. It seems he's in big trouble now that people around him have caught wind of his numerous misdeeds. Sometime later, I received a call from Charlie's company. They informed me that they would be treating Charlie's death as a work-related accident, so we would be receiving compensation. I knew that his death wasn't the company's fault. So I felt terribly guilty about it being recognized as a work-related accident and receiving compensation. I couldn't just keep quiet and accept the money, so I went to see Charlie's boss.
I'm so sorry for all the trouble my son has caused. The truth is, he didn't collapse because of work. It was due to the stress from his wife.
I explained, detailing everything that had happened. Charlie's boss looked shocked as he finished listening to my story. But his expression quickly turned serious again.
No, regardless of the reason, we want you to accept the compensation. Please think of it as our final way of recognizing Charlie's contributions,
he said. He had apparently brought the project to the verge of completion, and thanks to his efforts, it had been a huge success. Charlie's contributions were immense, and they said the project never would have gotten off the ground without him pushing it forward. This project had been the catalyst for the company's significant growth. So they were immensely grateful to him, but regretted not being able to express their appreciation directly. I was so happy to hear them hold him in such high regard. Charlie's life, spent working diligently and doing his best, hadn't been in vain after all. If only I could tell him directly that the project had succeeded, that the company had grown thanks to him. But that wish will never come true. Hoping that he would be rewarded even a little in heaven, I decided to accept the compensation money. The amount was more than enough to cover David and Eric's future educational expenses. Just as Charlie had said when he was alive, I want the two of them to grow up doing what they love, without any restraints. Someday, they'll both have dreams of their own. I don't want them to give up on their dreams just because they're living with me and don't have their parents around. I decided to carefully save this money so that when the time comes, I can give them plenty of options to choose from. With a renewed determination to raise these two to become people who can contribute to society, just like Charlie, I made up my mind. From now on, the three of us will live happily together, keeping him in our thoughts.